Boom. Are we recording? We are recording. What is going on, guys? Welcome to the video. This is a special one. It's a special one for two reasons. Number one, I'm going to just sit here and talk to the camera as if you're my journal entry for the night. And we're going to just be super real. I'm going to try to not edit this at all. And we'll see how that goes and where that takes us. But number two being that this is a really special video for me to make because this is the journey to a sub-4 hour marathon coming from zero running less than a year ago. And it's special not just for the running, but the mental growth that I've experienced at the hands of the running and in tandem with the running. All of this disordered eating healing that I've been afforded by signing up for something that made me confront those problems more aggressively than ever before. And just healing a very fractured mind-body relationship. So it's detailed and it's nuanced, but it's extraordinary. And if you tune in and you listen to it, I think you are going to learn a thing or two, if not just about me, but I think really about yourself and how to overcome the things in life that feel impossible. So without further ado, let's get started. This journey really starts with the question of why I started running in the first place. And the short answer to that is lockdown, because my gym closed. I was an avid powerlifter before I got into running. Once I started working, almost 2 years ago, I graduated college. I didn't have as much time to just strictly do powerlifting, which is what I'd been doing before. And so I picked up bodybuilding, but I was still in the gym at least 6 days a week. Most of the time I was in the gym every single day. So I needed to find a kinesthetic outlet, a release of sorts once all the gym shut down. And I started running, not at the beginning of lockdown, I think probably in like July or August. I had always had nagging calf pains because I think at this point, like 3.5 years ago, I strained my right calf really bad doing a Spartan sprint. And it scared me to ever want to run on it ever again because it always just gave me all these nagging issues. But, you know, I started slowly. I went on a couple 2 to 3 mile runs 1 week during the summer. I remember that week distinctly because I was so amped that I could run 2 miles and not be in pain. And that kind of was just what started that flywheel. That was what kickstarted that realization of, oh, like I can do this. I can run again. Once I realized that I could run at least like 2-3 miles, I just decided to sign up for a 10K. I found a Hal Higdon program online. I think it was like 6 weeks to lead up to that. And I just started running. And at that point, I think the longest run that I had ever done in my life was 3.5 to maybe 3.8 miles. So it was a big jump for me and it felt very intimidating at the time. But something special happened because I did my 10K and I went through that program totally fine for the most part. But during my 10K, once I realized that I could finish it, maybe I was at mile 4.5 to mile 5, my brain went, easy. That was easy. This is easy. Now you're going to sign up for a half marathon. And I just rolled right into a half marathon prep leading into the winter. Because at this point, I think that puts us around like October timeframe. And that one really tested me, like just prepping for a half marathon. I think the longest training mile that I had done at that point, my peak week was 10 miles. And that really intimidated me at that point. Like that was a really big number of miles for me to run and hit. The same thing, I was using a Hal Higdon program online. And this whole time during that prep, I was remembering my track record or this thing that I had noticed that happened, right? Like I ran a couple miles a few times and it was like, sign up for a 10K. I mean, that felt fine. That kind of felt like it was motivated by me. And then I thought too, when I did the 10K and towards the end of that race, that voice came in and said, sign up for a half marathon. And that still felt doable to me. But I just thought back to that voice that had kept coming back when I was doing this running. That was when I think I'm done, essentially this voice would kick in and say, you got to do it more. You got to go farther. And I prayed and prayed during that half marathon prep that voice would not come back. because I legitimately did not think I was physically capable of running a marathon for a very long time. And so I was petrified that I was going to run this half marathon and the voice is going to come in. And lo and behold, the voice came in. It said, you have to run a marathon. And when I say that, I mean, like, those words didn't come from my desire or my choice. It felt like they were deeply powerful, intuitive words that rose right from the depths of my belly. And it was almost like just getting a download that was like, oh, this is kind of something that you need to do now. And take that for what you will. If you want to call it, somebody speaking to me, or just a bad thought, because I really didn't want it to happen. And then maybe you could say I manifested it, but that's exactly what happened. And at that point, I was pleading with the universe. Apparently not well, because I still ended up having to run a marathon or sign up for it. But I just kept saying, like, come on, please, man, don't do this to me. Don't do this to me. And that voice kind of was just like, sorry, you are going to have to sign up for a marathon and run a marathon. And I was really scared of that. I was scared of it for a long time. Like I mentioned, I really physically felt like I was not capable of running a marathon. And this is weird for me to talk through, because I don't know where that's come from, realistically speaking, because overweight people run marathons. People who aren't fit run marathons. It happens all the time, year after year. And I'm a very physically fit person. I'm pretty active. And so, I can't really tell you why I always thought I was just like not me. That's like a superhuman thing. I would never be able to do it. But I had no self-belief. I just legitimately didn't think that it was something that I could do. And I was in that marathon prep for at least, I think, 3 weeks before I told anybody about it, like including my girlfriend, because I knew that if anyone gave me like a shred of shock or surprise, or like, wow, how do you feel about that? Like if they expressed their intimidation upon me, I was just going to crash. Like I wasn't going to be able to overcome it. So I needed to wait a long time to kind of just let myself digest the reality that it was something that I had to do, and just try to increase or enhance that self-belief along the way. So for like 10 weeks of this, I think 18-week marathon prep, I didn't think that I could do it. And I think the first very natural and fair question for anybody to watch this video to ask would be why. And I think there's a lot of reasons, but I think mainly for me, the biggest one is trauma. I have a very fractured body relationship, and any time that my body has suffered, either at the hands of me or at someone else, instead of sympathizing with my body for what it had experienced or gone through, I kind of turned against my body, and I would just get upset at it for showing me signs that it wasn't okay. And if you're coming across my channel for the first time, I was sexually abused when I was 14. Before that, I had years of extreme stomach distress and GI issues that went undiagnosed, and they were kind of essentially unresolved. So I self-diagnosed that as just extreme anxiety. But yeah, I have a long track record there with not feeling safe or at home in my body. And I kind of would always turn against myself in those situations. I'd just beat it down. And if I were to tell you like what I think the secret now in hindsight to running these long distances are, I think the secret is just having a very synergistic mind-body alignment. Like you need to be able to encourage your body through the pain that it's experiencing on a long run. And your brain needs to understand that it can will you through it. Like both sides of that equation need to be working together if you're going to be able to get it done. Because even though I have a strong body, my mind would break down, towards the end of a long run. And then when things got really long, I felt like my body could do it, but my mind was breaking because it was scared. And the reality is, if like these two extraordinarily integral parts to like basically anything we do in life, but especially a physical feat like a marathon, if those parts are constantly arguing and nagging, like just think about a relationship that's just not working. Like you're never going to be able to transcend your current capabilities and overcome any limitations at the state of your current life. You need to be firing on all cylinders, right? Like an engine can't work on one cylinder. And I would say that I was definitely like a one-cylinder body. It was like I have strong components to myself, but there were a lot of components to me that were just dead for a long time, or like dormant. Let's say dormant. Let's not use dead. So I knew that needed to change. And it did. Throughout the course of this prep, that tiny little voice inside, that maybe it was the same voice that was like, you have to run a marathon. But there was this tiny little voice inside me that started to come out as I got deeper and deeper into my marathon prep. I think, it was weeks in before I heard it for the first time. I think, I'd maybe been on like a 10, 11, 12 mile run, something around that. And it was definitely my longest run to date. And, towards the end of it, I heard this little soft voice in my head. And in hindsight, I think that was just being very present, and I recognize that I actually do love myself. Oh, excuse me. That little voice came out and was like, I love you for doing this. Like, we're so capable. And I got so excited in that moment. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. My body, it's capable. And then my brain, realistically, my ego came in once it heard that thought and it beat it down. It was like, who are you to think that just because you're running 12 miles and you're okay, that you're capable of doing this? Like, really? And that voice wasn't strong back then. So it got beaten down and it got shy and it went back to its little corner. But each long run that I went on, that voice came out earlier and it came out stronger. And I think at that point I might have been on a 14-mile run. And that voice, my body is capable, came out midway. And that was an amazing milestone for me. It was an extraordinary breakthrough to feel that at the middle of my run instead of right at the very end. And then, my ego would come in and kind of quiet it down, or I'd almost get mad at myself for loving myself. It's really messed up. I know there's a lot of trauma there that we've been working through. But it stayed with me, I think, right up until the end of that long run. And that was a real turning point for me. That was a recognition that it could sustain and stand up against my ego. And then these runs are getting longer and longer. And I remember it was like my 15-miler or my 16-miler. I had that thought, my body is capable, and I love my body for doing this. I had those two thoughts before I'd even stepped foot on the run. And that was when I really understood that things were changing in a really big way for me, because that was just massive growth to feel that at the beginning before I was even on a run that was hard, and to know that it could stand up against my ego when there wasn't something distracting me, a higher heart rate or pounding on the pavement. And then my first roadblock popped up, which, in hindsight wasn't terrible, but I moved to a new town where I needed to start running on roads that I wasn't familiar with. And that was really hard for my trauma and my hypervigilant tendencies, but we got that done. And I started kind of coasting again. And then that's when, I'd say right as the voice inside me that started to feel confident and good and it loved me, right as that started to gain real power, is when I feel like I hit my first major roadblock in this prep, which was dealing with my disordered eating habits. Because at this point, I'm running, 25, 30 miles a week, something around then. And the amount of food that I needed to eat was tremendous. And that made me, I needed to eat more and more. And I used to validate, and I still honestly do. Really, I'm not afraid to admit that. I had a lot of validation come from being small, by being thin, by being lean. It goes right back to that bodily trauma where a lot of it's centered around the stomach. And, that's when I told my therapist, look, I really need to change this. The whole reason that, I signed up for the marathon in the first place was to raise awareness for sexual assault, because April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and I ran it at the end of April. And I told her, I was like, the next, 8 weeks leading up to the marathon, I really want to work on this body relationship. And I want to almost kind of see, almost in like a sensational way, like what can we do really in 8 weeks? No, I needed that work at the time. And I'm so glad we did it because I feel so healed at this point in time in my life with nutrition, which is incredibly shocking for me to be able to say. It was extremely deep therapeutic work that essentially became like a full-time job to manage and control. And it threw everything that I personally knew about road mapping and controlling my way through the world out the window. We just spiraled. Like I had always had this, I don't want to say it because I feel like that could be triggering for people, but I always had this body weight in my head that was perpetuated by weighing myself daily. So it became like a compulsive, like an OCD thing. And I remember getting to the point where I was like, damn, like I'm 2 pounds away from that number. I don't know what's happening here, but it's great because I'm going to keep running and I'll just keep eating the same things. And then, that increased training volume and caloric expenditure will bring me down. And then that's when I really started to understand like something just was not right. Like my awareness to the problem was really gaining traction. And I told her we needed to make a big change. And we started chipping away. And the first thing that she said, my therapist said that I needed to do was throw away the scale because I thought, that perceived sense of control was giving me more confidence and happiness in my body. But it turns out that was just perpetuating the body shame and restricting cycle. So I needed to throw my scale out. And that was hard. Definitely because then I started like eating way more right after that because I wasn't constantly thinking about like, what can I eat? What can I not eat? But it wasn't terrible because I was still tracking my food at the time. And that tracking, I was like, you can get rid of my scale, but I'm still kind of controlling things. Like I understand the numerical value of the energy that I'm putting in my body. But, at some point, just tracking my food after realizing that the scale was such a problem for me in my life, it almost felt like the visual of, a stubborn child having like a hissy fit in a playground. And like, I'm the adult essentially in this scenario. And this need for control and these stupid patterns that I've just been like trying to convince myself are healthy for me are the kid that's screaming around. And I'm kind of just standing there like staring at myself at those parts of me, kind of like, are you done yet? Like, this is kind of getting really ridiculous. You just please act your age. Like, you're 23. Come on, let's get with it. And then I stopped tracking and I really went in free fall for a few weeks. It was hard to gain a little weight. It was hard to navigate that during my marathon because it was like, oh yeah, like I feel so good because I'm eating, but then I'd gain weight. And it was a very challenging battle for many weeks. Am I going to run out of, all right, we're good right now. Yeah, it was a challenging battle for a little while. But we got out of it. I leveled out with newfound confidence, really being able to tap into my hunger cues and eating to fuel my training. I was able to get back into the gym more intensely to do more and more weight training workouts again, which, had definitely, gone down in frequency as I just, lost overall energy. And it was probably around this time too, like probably around mile 18 for my like longest run at that point in time when I started to really believe that I could run a marathon. And it wasn't this confidence, it was more like I can definitely force myself to get over that if I can run 18 miles. So that was a really big shift for me. But again, like that was, I don't know, mile 18 in my prep, I think was 5 weeks out or 6 weeks out for my marathon. So it really, I went months in this prep. I literally went 3 whole months in this prep before starting to feel capable of running a marathon. And I think the lesson there is sometimes it takes us time to like build the ability to do things, and to the extent that you can control it and it can be, self-inflicted growth. If I had waited until I felt ready to run a marathon before signing up for my marathon, I probably would have never run my marathon, because I would have never voluntarily signed up to run 15, 16, 18 miles on the weekend, because that scared me and I didn't think I was capable of doing those things either. So when you kind of like sign up and progressively overload and expose yourself to those things that are uncomfortable and you feel like you're not capable of, that's how you expand your capabilities. That's how you grow. So if you're thinking about signing up for a marathon, but you're like, I don't know if I can do it, it's like, you're going to learn how to do it while you're in that prep. Like, you don't need to have all the pieces put together before you sign up for one. You don't need to be an elite runner. You just sign up for a program, and the programs are designed to take you from not really running that much to being able to run. The program that I was on was very maintainable in terms of like the midweek mileage was super low. So it was easy to balance with work up until, like a few weeks out when I was running 40-mile weeks. But that's what I would say to you. And that's what I would say to myself too, is if you wait until you feel like you're ready to sign up for things, a lot of times it's just, that moment's not going to come. Like, you kind of need to kick yourself out the cradle. You know how like a bird kind of pushes its baby birds out of the nest because they need to experience the feeling of falling to learn how to spread their wings and fly? That's kind of how growth works in a lot of ways in life. You kind of just need to, someone's going to push you out the nest, or you're going to have to take that dive yourself. This podcast that I listened to last week, this guy said, take the leap and the net will appear. And I loved that. Take the leap and the net will appear. Love quotes like that. All right, so that kind of takes us from the beginning of this whole thing through the trauma healing and the disordered eating healing, and this confidence that I started to build up, and this self-belief that started to really strengthen and build in me. That brings us to the marathon. My marathon was 5 days ago. I'm recording this Friday after. And let's talk the details of the day of. So, the marathon. I ran it with my friend Kevin Hogler. He has a YouTube channel. I'm going to pop that up on the screen now. Kevin's an ultra runner, and he's run a whole bunch of marathons in the past. He ran a 100-mile race a few months ago. He actually has another 100-mile race in, I think, 2 weeks from when I'm recording or when I'm posting this. And he was so kind to offer to run the entire marathon with me, which in hindsight, I really did need. I knew I could run, 10, 15, 16, 17 miles alone, fine. But in hindsight, it was just so incredible to do this not alone. I mean, most people run marathons in a massive event, but I, really appreciated just having his guidance there. And he tracked on his watch for me the distance, which that's a foreshadow to an important story about this whole thing. But everything was fine. It was kind of rainy. The rain cleared up by the end, but it was drizzling when we started off. And I was listening to a podcast, the same one that I just mentioned about, take the leap and the net will appear. And this guest, Kamal Ravikant, he was talking about how to love yourself in this podcast. And he said, the first step that I recommend to people is breathe in and then breathe out 10 times. And on the exhale, just say thank you. And I started doing this. I did this probably, off and on throughout the course of the race for probably like an hour and a half to 2 hours or so. It was just like, thank you, like over and over again. And it really centered me and it really grounded me. And then the plan was to go like 9.4 miles out, cut in for 4 miles, go back out another 4 miles, and then rein it in. And then we had like a little buffer towards the end to kind of walk to the car. And at mile 13 and a half, at this point, like everything's going fine. I started to kind of get a little tired. I was eating every 4.5 miles. I had a goo every 4.5 miles. I had Gatorade Zero and sugared Gatorade in my hydration bladder with a whole bunch of salt in it. So I had carbs, electrolytes, and just fluids in there as well. So I was very good from a nutritional perspective, but I just started to kind of get, tired, as your legs do. And this whole point that I had been doing, the 10K, the half marathon, and like the marathon prep, I don't have a running watch. I just use the Strava app on my phone, which I realized is the distances on that app aren't accurate like a watch is. And I had a feeling, potentially that this had happened because Kevin and I had run my 14 miler together, and his watch said like 14.02 and my phone said like 14.37. I didn't really think anything of it at that point, but when we got to mile 13 and a half and he let me know, hey, it's 13 and a half, it's time for you to eat your next goo, I just pulled out my app out of curiosity. And my app on this phone had said that I had already run 14.6 miles. And that's when I realized that this whole time I have been running less than I thought I was. And my peak training run was supposed to be 20 miles. I realized in that moment, I've never run 20 miles before. And that's a big number. That's a big milestone number for a marathon prep. Is kind of, that's when people start to get fatigued and maybe bonk if you're going to bonk. Like that's usually when it hits you. So that's an important milestone to get to so that you kind of know what that feeling is like. And that's when I realized, like, you know what? The longest run that I had probably been on unintentionally, even though my watch said that I had done 20, I had probably realistically only done like 18.7 miles at that point. And that's a pretty big jump. Like, it might not sound like a big jump, but that's almost whatever. That's an over 8 mile, almost an 8 mile differential. That's a lot of running. That's like over an hour of running to have not been exposed to before. So that's when I started to realize, like, all right, things are probably going to get real now. And then when he let me know that we had hit 18 miles, I turned on the gas. I had a natural goo that had 40 milligrams of caffeine. I was feeling good. Like, I turned to Kevin. I was like, I don't know. I don't drink soda, but all I want is a Coca-Cola right now. And then the next point that I was supposed to stop to eat every 4.5 miles, right, was 22.5. And as I got closer to 22.5, I really started to slow down. And I felt like I slowed down. Maybe not necessarily my pace wasn't super slow, but just physically, mentally, my body started to kind of get really tired. I started to convince myself that he thought that I was doing really well, like that I looked really good on the course. And he had made an executive decision that we weren't going to stop at 22.5, which he would never do that, because the whole point for him to, tap me on the shoulder is to say it's time to eat. Like, that's something that would help me. But it felt so long that I convinced myself. I was like, there's no way that I haven't hit 22.5 miles yet. And once I had that shift, it was an arrogant shift, right? Like, it's the ego. It's trying to protect me because it feels like it's suffering, or it's about to suffer and it doesn't want to. I started to feel better. I was like, all right, let's push a little bit. And then maybe 10 or 15 minutes after I had those thoughts, Kevin turns to me and he's like, all right, 22.5. And I just looked at him like, you've got to be kidding me. And that was a mind break for me at that point. Was just, I cannot believe that I haven't finished this. Like, I really thought that he was going to stop me and be like, yeah, we're done. And I felt so close to the end of the course because I haven't run there a bunch, and it just felt like we were really there, but we weren't. And that was a big eye-opener for me. And then 22.5 to 25.2 is really when the suffer fest started for me. Every single mile at that point felt like I was running 4.5 miles. It was so long. And I told Kevin, I was like, when we get to 23.2, you tell me I have 3 miles left, then you tell me I have 2 miles left. You got to tell me every mile on the mile. And those miles felt like forever, like so long. I definitely slowed down a lot at that point. I think I think at that point I hit, I think, a 10-minute per mile that was the slowest mile that I ran, which I just realized I never talked about this. I ran it in 3 hours, 54 minutes and 26 seconds, which was, I think, like an 8:54 minute per mile pace. But yeah, at this point I was sucking. I skipped my last goo because I felt nauseous. I just felt like I wasn't going to be able to hold it down. My body just wanted to stop. And then things started to change around 25.15. I was running as hard as I could muster without, I didn't want to end this by feeling sick. So I was jogging. I was like, I don't want to get to the end of this and collapse or throw up. I'm going to just do what I feel like I can do to really see this out to the end with grace and with my wits about me. We're doing this, like I said, the last mile, tell me every quarter mile. And at that point, things really started to slow down, and the breathe in and breathe out and say thank you, it really wasn't working anymore. I was like, thank you for what? This suffering that I'm putting upon myself? I don't need that. What is happening? What am I even doing here? And he let me know when we were at 26.15. It was a little bit left, and I just gunned it. I started just animalistic grunt. I don't even know if he was hearing me, but I was just honestly, realistically, I was probably not even moving that fast, but it felt like I was just pushing myself really hard. And then he was like, that's it. We're at 26.2. Stop. You're done. And it was all over. And I realized in that moment, I never want to run a marathon again. And this is why. I spent a lot of that race day saying, thank you. I get to suffer. I'm so grateful that I have a healthy body and I have healthy legs and I can do this. But by the end of that marathon, by the time that I was starting to shift that dialogue that I was having with myself, I realized that I no longer want to suffer in my life. I no longer wanted to choose that pain. That thank you didn't work anymore because I was like, I don't need to suffer. I don't need to make myself hurt anymore. I've done that my whole life by being so critical of myself and by speaking down upon myself and by trying to force myself to run effectively on the one-cylinder engine model. And at that moment, I was just like, I just want to sit down and breathe and journal and do yoga maybe and stretch and meditate and just be calm. And this is important for me to talk through. I hope Kevin's cool with me sharing this, but at the end, I was really impressed because that was the hardest thing that I had ever done. And Kevin runs 50-mile races. He runs 100-mile races. He runs trail races that are muddy and through the woods and that have elevation gain. And I could not imagine finding it in myself to get to 50 miles or 100 miles. So I asked him, and it's like, what motivates you to be able to do that? And to where does your mind go? Does it go somewhere special that maybe it doesn't go at 20 or 26.2 miles? What's happening? And there's probably countless reasons. I know there's a lot of reasons for why, Kevin's an ultra runner. But he stopped and he stood there for a second and he thought about it. And the response that he gave to me in that moment, which, I'm not here to say this is the only reason that he runs these kinds of distances, but he said, because when he gets to that point in a race and he's just breaking it down, just 1 mile, just 10 miles, just 15 miles to go, he gets these mantras in his head and he's connecting with himself and he's extraordinarily present. And it essentially to me sounded like this feeling of oneness and this deep connection with himself. And that's when it hit me. That's when I realized why I didn't want to run a marathon ever again. And I emailed my therapist immediately and I shared the story with her that I'm about to share with you now, which was recognizing that the work that we've done to heal the broken parts of myself has been so profound that it has led me to a spiritual awakening. Like, I'm literally going through a spiritual awakening right now that no one really knows about in my life except for, a couple of gold nuggets in my life. And I feel that oneness when I'm walking down the street. And I don't need to run a marathon or sign up to, charge through 50 plus miles to get to that feeling, because it's with me when I'm just at rest and I'm calm. And that's when I realized that I don't really have that much pain left to transcend. That people sign up for marathons and these monolithic endurance events, not to feel pain, but because it's an environment that allows them to feel pain and learn how to transcend it. And I know how to transcend my pain now. I know what I need to do to transcend that pain and to learn how to love myself. And I have very little pain left to transcend, because my therapist and the practice that we're doing, they both have just truly broken me open. I feel free and I feel connected in a way that I've never felt in my life. And I used to be the kind of person who would, self-inflict punishment upon myself. And that's not to say there's anything wrong with running a marathon. I think it's one of the most remarkable things somebody can do. And I needed to run it to get here. But, I think the way that I would wrap this video up is by saying, I don't think the hardest thing that someone can do is to run a marathon or an ultramarathon or climb a mountain or jump out of a plane. I think very often the hardest thing that we can do as humans is to learn how to love ourselves for who we are and what we've been through. And that can be the biggest fear for a lot of people. And the hardest challenge usually isn't going to be the one that you sign up for. The hardest thing to learn how to do is to really love yourself. It's to learn how to love yourself when you feel like you've failed. That's not a word. When you feel like you've failed and you feel like you're not living up to your expectations, either, internal or something else. And no amount of challenge or suffering can teach you that. It's something that you need to learn. And you learn it by having a broken, open heart. Not by breaking your heart, not by breaking your body down. It can be the catalyst for people to break open. But for me, I realized that I don't need to do that anymore. And I think that's the most freeing lesson that I could have learned throughout this entire journey, is that I'm okay as I am and I don't need to push myself to hurt any more than I already have been hurt in the past. And I don't know if I needed to run a marathon, but it's the journey that brought me to that realization and the recognition that, the spiritual path that I'm on now that I mentioned is the greatest joy that I'm going to pursue, and learning how to love myself and be present with myself and still is going to be the biggest challenge of my life personally. And that right there, that's not done by being intense or being intimidating or pushing myself and moving and going really fast or moving at 100 miles an hour in these different aspects of my life. That's not doing anything but being myself and learning how to love who I see staring back at me in the mirror every single day, and learning how to see that she's worthy. So that's what I choose. What do you choose? Thank you for being here. I love you. And it's been a long time coming, and I'm proud of myself. It's not something that I would have been able to say 18 weeks ago, but I'm sitting here in quiet and with a big smile on my face, because right after I press that stop button on the camera, I'm going to go meditate, and that's going to be really, really good for me. And I'm happy that I see that as good. Cheers to you finding the good in you, whether it's through running a marathon or breathing, going to hike a mountain, or just hugging somebody. There's a whole bunch of different ways that you can find presence and connection with yourself. And I hope you find it. However it gets to you, it'll be yours. Just be open. Thank you for being here. I'll see you next week.